This is Harman Smith, and welcome to today's edition of Nintendeen Today. Today, Nintendeen is giving his hot take on Wii U versus Switch 2. Very specifically, he is arguing that the Wii U was in fact far more popular and successful than Nintendo Switch 2. Let's take a look at his video.
Maybe even the last 10 years. You know, just being a Nintendo fan that enjoyed watching YouTube videos on Nintendo for the past 15 or so years, I've basically loved Nintendo, whether they were succeeding with the Switch or failing with the Wii U. I purchased the consoles on day one, or at least close to it, I bought most of the games fairly early on, and I don't know, I was just having a good time, vibing with the same vibes that the people in the videos were giving off. And especially through the very early years of the Switch, I mean, yeah, the Switch was a better console than what we saw before, but I didn't really see most Nintendo channels at least, because again, I'm not clicking on the comments and reading them, and I'm not really following along a hate tirade. But from what I saw, at least, most Nintendo fans, they fondly remembered the Wii U. They understood it for its flaws, but it's not something that was hated.
Yeah, there's no way this guy was around during the Wii U era because nobody had anything nice to say about the Wii U. Okay, one of the reasons this channel exists is because everybody was trashing the Wii U nonstop, even though it was by far the best console that generation. It was by far one of Nintendo's best periods ever. It was full of innovation, full of original new titles, full of amazing new games, but the Nintendo community at large could not bring itself to face that. And what we're seeing today is a backlash to that mindset because the people who actually played these games growing up, who know more about them now than the YouTubers back then, are now old enough to tell them just how retarded they actually were. So the Wii U was hated by terminally online grifters and weirdos, but actual fans were pretty supportive of the console all throughout its lifespan. But that's not what Nintendeen is saying here. What he's trying to say here is that Nintendo YouTubers were very supportive of the Wii U and were releasing positive coverage of it when that just wasn't the case at all. I know this because I was there.
I don't know if this is an algorithm thing, I don't know if it's a targeted thing, I don't know if it's my age. I was a lot older when the Wii U came out, so I didn't really have the same type of ties that somebody a decade younger than me might have. But, I mean, it was a bad Nintendo console, but it was still a Nintendo console, and a bad Nintendo console is still a good console, generally. There was a lot to love, and almost every conversation I've seen amongst the Nintendo fandom when the Wii U comes up typically is praising the Wii U, even though we agree that it was flawed. Very flawed, in a lot of ways. Mostly in Nintendo's planning around it. But there was a lot to love for a lot of people. So, the reason I'm giving this background is because throughout the last 24 to 48 hours, I've noticed some people really starting to go hard against the Wii U. I don't know if I started the discourse or if the discourse was happening and I just added fuel to the fire, but I noticed some people making comments that they just do not understand why anybody would have nostalgia for the Wii U.
Nintendeen, you get 20,000 views a video. You're not influencing the conversation about anything. In fact, whenever anyone talks about you at all, they're making fun of you. I keep seeing him do this in that he keeps pretending as if he's the biggest name on the platform when in actuality, there are way bigger people on here than him. So this idea that he has that oh yes, I'm influencing the discourse. I'm the one leading the movement. I'm the biggest Nintendo channel on YouTube. It's just something that just makes him look positively ridiculous.
But back during the Wii U's time, I didn't really think it was the best Nintendo console out there. I don't even think it was in my top 5 favorite ones, but I still enjoyed it. It still had the games that I would enjoy playing. And maybe it's the fact that it was not the only console that I owned. I also had a handheld 3DS. Pretty sure I had an Xbox 360 still that I would play every now and then. Plus, during the time of the Wii U, I was finishing college, starting my career, so I don't think I was gaming nearly as much, nor I was really active that much online. It was mostly just listening to stuff while I worked. So I knew it was flawed, but I didn't really feel like it was a terrible Nintendo experience. I think there was a lot to love about the console even. And then I'm thinking, okay, if I'm somebody that's, in his early 20s, playing this game enough with friends and family around me, and enjoying every single one of the main IPs that were on that console, and compound that with the fact that I've seen so many different conversations about people who are like, yo, like the Wii U was harshly hated, the Wii U was amazing, the Wii U was phenomenal. There's so many people that have been glazing that console recently. I mean, in the US alone, it still had like 6 million people that bought it. That's like the number of people that have a Switch 2 right now, and if that's a big number, then so is this.
Is this retard really comparing lifetime sales of Wii U versus like year one of Switch 2? Like, you know how insane that sounds? That's just ridiculous. And this really goes to show you just how you can't trust Nintendeen when he throws numbers around. This isn't the first time he's done something like this. Like, I'm always catching him like making claims about how games aren't selling well on Switch 2, and how like third parties can't succeed, and how like nobody in Europe or North America is buying the Switch 2. And it's just that just isn't true at all. And it's very, very, very clear if you parse through his statements a little bit and you actually look up the actual numbers and the actual like information. Because if you just let Nintendeen explain these things to you, he's just gonna like brazenly lie about it and misrepresent the facts.
So clearly, there were enough people during its lifespan, maybe not in the first year or so, that did like it enough. And especially kids. Shoot, like I have cousins and nephews and friends that have little ones that grew up on the Wii U, and they still talk about how amazing it is. Or it was, rather. So all I'm thinking is like, how do you not understand why someone might have nostalgia for the Wii U? Did you just think that like people were miserable when they bought the console and never happy the entire time they had it, and just went through an entire console generation hating owning a Wii U? Like, it's not, that doesn't happen. You buy something, if you don't like it, you move on from the Wii U and you don't think back to it and be like, I remember it negatively.
Oh, okay. I actually agree with him here. This is what general consumers do. This is what the ordinary audience did when it came to the Wii U, is that they just kind of moved on from it and didn't really talk about it at all. It just wasn't in the discussion in like normie spaces in a lot of regards. But that's not what we're talking about here. Like, what we're talking about is the online gaming community. The online gaming community absolutely had a bone to pick with the Wii U, and were doing everything they possibly could to downplay everything about it, from like the new releases to every single Nintendo Direct to every single like major exclusive. Like, we saw lots of really weird things happen during the Wii U era. You know, I'm always talking about how people spurred out about Cranky Kong being in Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, while at the same time glazing No Man's Sky. Like, No Man's Sky is still glazed, honestly. And meanwhile, like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is like one of the greatest platformers of all time. Okay, the difference in quality between those two things is pretty palpable. It's pretty obvious. But like Donkey Kong is one of the best things ever made, while No Man's Sky is complete slop. But the gaming community rallied behind No Man's Sky because they thought it was going to be this like endless universe, like just endlessly replayable game, and it's just not. Like, No Man's Sky has never lived up to the hype. But at the time, you know, that was the kind of game that the average gaming YouTuber was shilling. Like, they didn't care about quality, they didn't care about the games themselves, they didn't care about like, you know, what they could get out of games. Like, all they cared about was covering the games that would get them attention and would like drive hype for their channels.
At least, that's what I thought. But I do not know if that's the case anymore. Anyway, so I remembered early on in the Wii U's life, there was like a meme that would be shared where people were like, oh, the Wii U sucked and Nintendo got it wrong. They should do it right next time. And then like it shows the Switch and it's like, yeah, the Switch is everything doing it right. This is what they should have done with the Wii U. And it's like a side-by-side of all of the Wii U ports that came to the Switch and how big of a deal it was early on in the Switch's life that it was just getting the Wii U games again. And it's those same Wii U games that were considered failure were now being reviewed and purchased and breaking records and considered such amazing titles. You know, like games like Tropical Freeze came to the Switch, and people started calling it the best 2D platformer of all time. 3D World was considered a joke on the Wii U, and then it came out on the Switch, and all of a sudden people were praising it. They were talking about how it's like, in a time post-Mario Odyssey, this is a great 3D Mario to return to.
Tropical Freeze and 3D World were already seen as massive classics on Wii U. They were already like very successful. Fans considered them like some of the best entries we'd ever gotten. Like there was a period where both of them were being massively downplayed, but that was in the pre-release period and maybe right when the games first came out. Certainly not with 3D World. 3D World won like a ton of Game of the Year awards, as I recall. But like, um the idea that like there was some radical shift in how these games were viewed after they were ported to the Switch is not true. They were already fairly popular. They were already very successful, and it's true that the Switch sold these games to a new audience and they became more popular and more successful and more recognizable. But I think that says more about the Switch than it says about the Wii U and about these games in general. These games were always very popular.
Mario Kart 8, I mean, Mario Kart 8 was loved on the Wii U, and it was loved even more when it came to the Switch. Breath of the Wild, that was a Wii U game. Granted, it came out at the end of the Wii U's life, so it's kind of really more like a Switch thing, I guess. Still, it's like built for the Wii U and brought to the Switch. And then you got like the Twilight Princess and Wind Waker ports for the HD from the GameCube, obviously, but the Wii U version is considered definitive for most people. The Yoshi game, Captain Toad, I mean, there were a lot of good times to be had on that console, especially if you were not somebody that bought a new game every single month, which I don't think most people were. Plus, you had your entire Wii library that you were playing on there, which is not all that different from all of the people right now that are buying Switch 2s and just playing Switch 1 games, right? Like, it's the same thing. Or at least that aspect of it is the same idea. Anyway, so I saw the thing, and I'm like, okay, what do you mean you don't know how people could have nostalgia for this? Obviously, if they were kids and they had a Wii U, they probably have nostalgia for it. Who are you to decide somebody cannot have nostalgia for something? And then I remember the meme, and I'm like, I'm gonna quote this and share this and just say nothing. Ooh, let me tell you. So first thing I noticed is that there were a lot of people that agreed with me. The post got way more hearts than it got comments, got a lot of bookmarks, a lot of retweets. I definitely was not yelling into a void. Right, you're talking about almost 500,000 views at this point, and it's a post that's definitely not ratioed. In saying that, I realize that if this video takes off, there's probably going to be a whole army of Nintendo fans that are probably going to flood to that now and get it ratioed, but at least at the time of recording, it was not ratioed. However, it did annoy a lot of people. And I think there are a few very clear reasons why. First and foremost, anything that comes out of my mouth tends to trigger Nintendo fans, which is a whole other psychological discussion that I'm not going to get into because I'm not a psychologist. Another reason is because the implication based off of the meme that I'm sending is that the Wii U was actually like really good and it was better than the Switch. At least I think that's how they're interpreting it, even though it's not quite. It's just, again, this is a response to somebody saying, I don't understand how anybody could have nostalgia for the Wii U. But if you're always ready for a console war, there's people that are going to read that and be like, oh, they're saying the Wii U is better than the Switch and the Switch too. No. So I think there was a lot of pushback for that reason. But the very interesting thing about it is the next part, is the realization for a lot of these people that when they think of the Wii U, they have a very different memory than what I remember. What most people that I've spoken to, even online, remember. Heck, even like what most of the YouTube videos for the same channels that are popular now for the Switch 2, what I remember about their mannerisms when they were talking about the Wii U, during the Wii U's life, as well as when we moved on to the Switch and reminiscing about the Wii U. They have a very dark memory of the Wii U. And it's because of the same comment that I'm seeing repeated over and over again. They don't understand how anybody could fondly remember the Wii U because all they remember during the Wii U time was that you were made fun of for being a Nintendo fan.
Things that didn't happen. Okay, I was like, older when the Wii U came out. Nobody made fun of me for playing the Wii U. Nobody in like my personal life cared. It was like a primarily an online thing where people were spurging out about it. But like the real problem with the Wii U was because of how aggressively everyone was pretending that this thing was like doomed to failure. Before it even came out, people were spurging out about the launch lineup and the games. You can see like all sorts of, videos about this and how people were saying like Nintendo lost the plot and they don't know what they're doing and that they're going to go third party. Like fans weren't being harassed for liking the console. Like what was actually happening was that like content creators, journalists, the scum of the industry were releasing hit piece after hit piece after hit piece on Nintendo for years. Like I would say that period of say 2009 to 2000 like 16 was like the biggest gaslighting campaign in video game journalism history, because everybody was coming out like releasing these articles saying Nintendo was failing, that the Nintendo Direct would never succeed, that nobody would buy Nintendo hardware, that nothing besides Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon was relevant. And like over that decade, we slowly saw the narrative like start to decline, and then we started seeing like games like Splatoon getting revealed, and then like Breath of the Wild and the Switch, and then like because of the Nintendo Direct format, like game journals didn't have the control that they used to have. Like these days, these guys are trying to sell you on like mixtape and trying to gaslight you into thinking Cyberpunk 2077 was good, or that it's like playable now. um Whenever they try and like talk about Nintendo, they just get laughed at, because it's universally regarded that these people don't know what they're talking about. But no, I was never bullied for liking Wii U. Nobody really made fun of me for being a fan of Nintendo consoles. Like, it's not a thing that happened during the Wii U era. It happened to me like in the DS era. I remember that pretty explicitly, how people would like spurg out and try and tell you the PSP would destroy the DS. And like, you had a lot of people who were like shilling for like the PlayStation and the 360. And then like, throughout the entire Wii generation, people were like spurging out about how bad it was and how it didn't have real games made for like serious gamers. There was a big push in that generation, but like, that was like a thing for kids. Okay. Like when you're older, nobody really gives a shit about this kind of thing. So the idea that people are like have a chip on their shoulders because of like getting bullied for liking the Wii U, like that's doesn't really seem to be a thing that like ever happened.
Now, I'm not here to laugh at bullying, and I'm especially not here to shame somebody for liking or disliking something else and making a joke out of that. Like, I don't think that's good. But I do think that this idea, this very same theme that keeps getting repeated over and over again, makes a whole lot of sense about a lot of the discourse that we've seen around Nintendo in general over the last year. A lot has been discussed about like this social connection that Nintendo fans tend to have with the actual corporation, a lot more with the IP than the other major video game companies. They don't see the same type of fandoms, typically speaking. And I wonder if part of it is the feeling of oneness, of defense, of this, you're bullied basically through most of your childhood or your formative years, or even if you're in your adulthood and you're a major Nintendo fan and people are just laughing at you for liking the baby console. And you were reflecting on yourself and being like, oh, am I weird for liking this? No, I can't be weird for liking this. I'm just having a good time. They're the jerks that are bullying me about it. Or perhaps someone might have taken it and felt embarrassed that they liked something that was not considered cool or socially acceptable. Right? Like, I think most Nintendo fans enjoy Nintendo for a specific reason. It's historically been about the passion that's been put into the actual games or the innovation, whether it's through the games or the way you play the games, and the feeling that you didn't need to be wowed by some kind of new piece of tech. The shiny nickel just didn't mean much, because at the end of the day, it was only 5 cents. Now, this wasn't always the case. This didn't really start being the case until probably after the GameCube, or really after the PlayStation 1 absolutely demolished the Nintendo 64. But even though the GameCube and the Nintendo 64 were graphically impressive, there was still a lot of innovation, not only from the controller of the 64 with its 3 prongs and the joystick, but the GameCube had its unique layouts, it had its analog triggers. There was a lot to love about that controller as well, and there still is a lot of love given towards the GameCube controller. Plus, it was like quirky, had like the purple box with mini CDs in there. It was pretty tiny. I don't know, it was a powerhouse. It was technically stronger than the PlayStation. I think in some cases it outperformed the Xbox, not in a lot of them. But it was still like a cute console, out of a lack of a better term. But still, anybody that started being a Nintendo fan anytime in the last 20 years, which I imagine is a whole crap ton of people, they were Wii fans, they were Wii U fans, DS fans. Whenever like that was happening, there was always a stronger console counterpart, whether it's the home console and the Xbox and the PlayStation, or even the PSP and the handheld market. Those were the devices that the cool kids wanted, but I don't think Nintendo fans really cared about being cool when it came to gaming. Or at least I thought they didn't. Because I didn't. And all of the circles that I was involved in didn't. And I actually think that's part of the reason why there is such a massive divide when it comes to the Nintendo community, that I personally really felt when the Switch 2 launched, but seemingly if you look back on a lot of the Nintendo fans, it started for many of them even with the Switch. Maybe not immediately when the Switch launched, but after the first 2 or 3 years, when they realized there was effectively nothing Nintendo about the Switch, and it was just a typical console.
What is he talking about? Nothing Nintendo about the Switch? The console that launched with ARMS, with that got put out, Yoshi's Crafted World, that gave us like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Animal Crossing New Horizons. Nothing Nintendo about the Switch. Like, really? Really? Like, the highest selling Nintendo console of all time. You're going to say that console was successful because it wasn't Nintendo-esque enough. Like, what are you talking about? Like, how do you come to that conclusion? It doesn't make any sense. Like, this thing is oozing with Nintendo history and culture and like appeal. Like, what do you mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Now, I don't think I ever felt it during the Switch's life, but when I look back now, I'm like, seeing where we are now, I can see how the Switch took us there, specifically how it took Nintendo to the type of crappy company that it is now. And I think many others just saw it before I did. But what I'm realizing now is that while I was sitting there just enjoying Nintendo for being the fun, quirky, interesting, playful console and company that it is, with amazing games, mind you, like it's not all just about the quirkiness, others basically, I guess they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to enjoy Nintendo while Nintendo was still considered cool. And the success of the Switch kind of gave them a chip on their shoulder because they felt vindicated. So now they were able to be part of this console war and look at the Xbox fans and the PlayStation fans and be like, oh yeah, this is a better console than yours and we sell faster. And
things that never happened. Okay, Nintendo fans have never brought PlayStation or Xbox into their scene. It's not something we talk about. It's not something we address at all. In fact, this entire video, like the reason it was brought about was because of like Wii U nostalgia. If you look at like what actually happened with like him posting that tweet about Switch versus Wii U, like PlayStation and Xbox had nothing to do with that at all. Like, we don't care about them. If you're someone who plays more than like 2 games a year, you don't care about PlayStation or Xbox. Like that's just the reality of it. Like PlayStation 5 at this point is just a Fortnite machine. Okay? When you get right down to it, the only things that people are playing on PlayStation these days are just flavor of the month slop that's going to fade into irrelevancy over time.
they just dealt with so much negativity during the Wii U's time, and people were laughing at them during the Wii U's time because it had such low sales and was considered a failure. And I don't know if these Nintendo fans ever quite got over that. I mean, clearly not if the first thing that comes to their mind when somebody mentions the Wii U is being bullied, is being laughed at for liking the baby console. I mean, think about the way that Nintendo fans speak about the Wii U now. They talk a lot about these third-party games, like how great it is that we have these third-party games on our console. We can finally play them and enjoy them. They want the games that people are playing on Xbox and PlayStation to be on Nintendo, so they can be like, oh yeah, we're part of this same group of people that get these games on day one.
You know why that happens, Nintendeen? You know why people obsess over third-party games so much? It's because we went through this process in the past 25 years of being told that third-party games are way better on PlayStation and they're way better on Xbox, and Nintendo's never, ever going to get these games. So the fact that we're getting them now is a big deal. Now, it doesn't matter as the actual quality. The fact that we're getting these games to begin with is just an indication of how PlayStation and Xbox are indeed on the way out. There is no reason to buy a PlayStation or an Xbox when these games are launching day and day on Switch 2 with all the features, all the graphics, like everything that's in those versions of the game. Like, the Switch 2 is the best console to own for this reason. There's no reason to own an Xbox or PlayStation or a PC if all the third-party games are launching on Switch 2 day and date.
Meanwhile, everybody else is sitting here like, I don't play these on Nintendo consoles. Why would I play this on Nintendo? I have something else to play this on. Give me Nintendo games, dude. Or like the way that they try to bring up the Switch 2. Oh, it's better than the PS4. It's better than the PS4. Well, obviously, the PS4 is their benchmark because they spent almost 12 years between the Wii U and the Switch getting bullied because of how much weaker their console was in comparison to the PS4.
How behind the times is this guy? You know, people in my community I myself am saying this, that Nintendo Switch 2 is better than gaming PCs. High-end, expensive, $5,000 gaming PCs. The Switch 2 has better games, they look better, they run better, they run at higher frame rates, it has actual exclusives. Like, the PC can't do shit. Okay? They can't even pirate Switch 2 games right now because there is no emulator. And all the crack emulation people are telling everyone that like it's going to take a decade to produce one. Like the Switch 2 has the gaming industry on lock. So the entire cope that we keep seeing from Nintendeen about how like, well, like why would I buy a game on Switch 2 when it's available on other platforms? Because the Switch 2 is the best version of the game. It is portable. It is more affordable. It runs at a higher frame rate, a higher resolution, looks better, and has exclusive titles. There is no benefit to paying $900 for a PS5 Pro to play Pragmata when you can just play half that, just pay half that and get the same game on Nintendo Switch 2. That's the situation we're in right now. Okay, like people may still own PS5s and Xbox Series X's and gameplay and gaming PCs, but at the end of the day, Nintendo is winning the console war because this is the console that has games that people actually want to play.
So I don't know if they're still clinging on to that because they're like, oh, the Switch 2's a portable PS4. That means it's better than the PS4. The PS4 was 10 years ago, dude. Like, this is the PS5 you should be comparing it to now. You're still inferior, from a hardware lens at least. And they're like so quick to jump to this conclusion that the Switch 2 is now part of this generation. And it trades blows with like, oh, the Xbox Series S, which is the weakest budget console that came out 6 years ago.
No, you retard. We're saying that it's competing with the PS5 Pro and the Xbox Series X because it's getting all the same games and looks better than the competition. That's just the reality of it. Okay? Like we're getting the same exact games that look and run better on Nintendo Switch 2. The fact that he has to like keep bringing up the fact that like the PS6 and like the Xbox Sex are on the horizon, you know, the next gen PlayStation and next gen Xbox. Like the fact that he has to bring those platforms up just goes to show you just how scared PlayStation and Xbox are of the PS2. Because without the illusion that these are premium brands that have like way more sophisticated hardware and run like way more sophisticated games, like they don't really have anything on Nintendo consoles, and that's becoming very very apparent every year, every console generation. Like like if the Switch 2 is getting pretty much every PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X game now, imagine how bad that's going to look when we actually get the Nintendo Switch 3, you know, when we get like everything the PlayStation 6 and the Series X have been getting. And like the whole like concept of Nintendo being behind the times or being technologically limited, that's over now. And you're seeing a lot of developers like acknowledge it. You know, Rockstar has been teasing like Grand Theft Auto 6 on Switch 2. And if that happens, like I don't think there'll ever be any going back.
And even then, calling it better than the Series S is very questionable because now you're opening up a discussion about whether it's visuals versus performance. It's a lot easier to look good than it is to play well, and when you're talking about frame rates that are choppy and struggle below 60 frames per second, I don't know that you can say that the Switch 2 trades blows with anything if all of those other consoles are running it at 60 frames per second. And I will take you a step further, compare it to any handheld gaming PC or any handheld device, and outside of like the most lowest and weakest ones, it's not trading blows with those either, because all of those have better visuals and better frame rates even though they're handheld. Now you could talk about how this is doing it with fewer watts or like the price point or whatever, but like the prices are actually not that far off because most of these stuff can be bought at a fairly healthy discount. I mean, shoot, back in Black Friday, you can get almost any handheld gaming PC for around $500, and most of them will run every one of these third-party games better than how the Switch 2 does.
First of all, I love how this dipshit tries to imply that $500 is a perfectly reasonable price when like the entire concept of his channel is that $500 is way too much to ask for a Switch 2. But even if the handheld gaming PCs could run the same games as a Switch 2, the same third-party games on a Switch 2. Like, it's never going to see official support for actual Nintendo releases. The whole coping about like pirating games and like putting them on the handheld gaming PC, it's not going to be a thing. Okay, it's not going to happen. By the time that like the Nintendo Switch 2 emulator comes out, by the time it gets cracked, like we're probably going to be on Nintendo Switch 3 and the entire process just restarts all over again. Like you are never, ever, ever going to play the brand new, like hot AAA, like Nintendo games on your handheld gaming PC. It's just not going to happen. And the simple fact of the matter that this guy is advocating you blowing $500 on a handheld gaming PC that cannot play the Nintendo exclusives. It just boggles the mind, because why would you ever advocate for that instead of advocating for a Switch 2 where you can play both? Like there's no reason for it. Like all you're trying to do is downplay the far superior Nintendo hardware.
And are you concerned about your electricity bill when you talk about the wattage? Like, I don't understand why this is even a talking point. Like, yeah, it's impressive that they're able to get these games running on this very thin, tiny tablet. But when I am spending money, I expect a certain level of performance back from whatever I'm spending that money on. And with the Switch 2, I don't see how anybody could enjoy these third-party titles, knowing how much more you're paying not only for the console, but for the games themselves to get a worse experience. But I suppose that's why third-party sales are, like, fewer than one per console.
Yeah, so this goes without saying, but the entire cope that third-party games don't sell on Switch 2 completely falls apart when you take into consideration that all of these third parties are bending over backwards to put all of their games on Switch 2. So obviously people are buying third-party games on Switch 2.
Ever since the Switch 2 has launched, so I'm clearly not alone on this opinion. But even if I were to yield and say, yeah, fine, the Switch 2 is cheaper right now if you're going based off of the prices compared to the home consoles, and it's also handheld, right? You gotta give it that credit. It's more affordable than everything else in the market that can play these same games at this time, but at the same time, you are still getting that inferior experience, which is the same concept as, like, the previous Nintendo generations. You were always getting a worse experience on the Nintendo console than you were on the other consoles when you're playing the same games.
Yeah, this just isn't true. It never was true. And yet it's like one of those weird, pervasive memes that has kind of persisted through the decades. The idea that third-party games automatically are better on PlayStation and Xbox is just completely wrong. Like, typically what happens is that when a Nintendo version of a game is better, it just gets downplayed or ignored. I realized that, about a decade ago, when I was playing through Sonic Heroes, like how awful that port actually was. The GameCube port, like it looks better, it plays better, it's you can actually finish it. The PS2 version has this weird like glitch with the emerald chases where like they're actually pretty much impossible. Like the GameCube version of the game is way better. But if you hadn't played both, if you hadn't like extensively like experienced these games, you would never figure that out. Like that's the problem, okay? Is that PlayStation and Xbox's major claim to fame, the only reason why anybody cares about these platforms at all is because of the illusion that they look and play better than Nintendo consoles. And that doesn't necessarily like match up to reality. Just look at Resident Evil 4 on GameCube versus the inferior PS2 version. But like this is something that like the industry has been pushing for 25 years, and it's like a defining characteristic of these consoles. It has no real basis in reality, especially these days, but like people like Nintendeen, like the mindset that these games are automatically better on PlayStation or Xbox, it's just not true, and it never was.
Like, it may look good when you're docking a Switch 2 in comparison to the Series S, but the frame rate sucks, and when you're playing it, you will notice the difference if you play enough games. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe the Nintendo fans defending it don't play other things. I don't know. And that opens up a whole other conversation as well, because if you're playing in handheld, you're definitely not getting anything even remotely the same as any of the competitors. So like we're comparing the hybrid console when it's docked to the home consoles when they're docked, but when you tell them, we're comparing two docked things. They're like, no, but this is a handheld. So it's like, don't compare the docked performance to the Series S performance. Compare the handheld performance to the Series S and the visuals to the Series S. Anyway, the point is, like, it's a measuring contest with the weakest of this generation, and we're about to move on to the next generation within the next couple of years too. The Switch 2 is clearly much weaker in comparison to everything around it, but that's okay. The issue, however, is that there is such a major obsession amongst the Nintendo fandom for that to not be okay, and the Switch 2 must be regarded as at least as strong as the Series S, right?
Do you know why that's an issue? Do you know why people talk about this? It couldn't possibly be because PlayStation and Xbox have marketed their brands. Their entire brands exist because of this idea that third party games are superior and that you'll get more realistic, better visuals and graphics and frame rate on those platforms and not Nintendo ones. Like, of course, Nintendo fans are going to have an issue with this false narrative being pushed and increasingly more and more people are getting agitated at how persistent it's been, even as, like, games like, say, Xenoblade Chronicles 3, far surpass every Tales game, every Final Fantasy game, every Dragon Quest game. Like, Nintendo RPGs have been bigger and better than anything on PlayStation in 25 years. Okay, Baldur's Gate 3 is not as good as Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but, like, the masses will never, ever, ever acknowledge it, and that's becoming, like, more and more of, like, a persistent thing that we're seeing. So we have to address the fact that, like, no, and, like, the Switch 2 is as powerful as the PS5 Pro. It is able to run all the same games, and the Nintendo exclusives are indeed better than all the third-party ones, right? We have to do it. Otherwise, you would have people like this coming out and trying to tell you that, like, well, actually, Resident Evil Requiem outperformed Pokemon Pokapia. No, it didn't. Like, you are gonna see Pokapia, like, destroy Requiem, like, long term. It's gonna be amazing to see. But the entire narrative, all right, the entire mindset that Nintendo can't compete with other consoles, like, hardware wise, it's just completely facetious, and it shouldn't be taken seriously by anybody.
Right, like, they've been trying to push up to that benchmark since the very beginning. Whereas in reality, most people yielded and said, fine, let's just accept that it's as strong as a PS4 Pro. But they won't accept that. But again, it's all part of this inferiority, this idea that, like, the Switch 2 should be considered a big boy console, for a lack of a better term. That's how they want it to be viewed as. They no longer want people to view Nintendo as like, oh, you got the big major guys with Xbox and Sony, and then, like the little brother console with the Nintendo. It's not the one you buy your kids. This is like what cool people buy. Whereas the people that are not really big fans of how Nintendo has been operating recently, they have the exact opposite opinion. Like, we don't want any of this. That's what our PC is for. That's what our PlayStation might be for. Or, maybe I don't even play that stuff. I just want that fun Nintendo charm. Dude, arguably that's exactly what's happening with Pokapia, and that's why it sold so well, because that was just like a typical Nintendo game. It was not graphically impressive. Most people that would see an adult man playing that in public might look at them funny. Not that it's right that they would look at them funny, but it's a reality that this stuff might still happen. And it's like a girly thing, a kiddie thing, or whatever other catchphrase these people want to use when they're embarrassed for their console. Which, okay, to be fair, I think that's dumb. Like, people should be able to enjoy whatever games they want to enjoy. But honestly, I feel like this whole experience has kind of just opened my eyes as to why so many people feel the way they do about the Switch 2, both for and against it. And a lot of it clearly has evolved from how the gaming community was treating them during the time of the Wii U. That's why, especially during the Switch era, and then moving on from the Switch to the Switch 2 era, whenever you would see anything that Nintendo was doing, something that historically Nintendo fans would scoff at other companies for doing it and take pride in Nintendo for not doing it, for example, calling their console the previous console and then a 2 at the end, or simply highlighting the frame rate and resolution during the presentation when, kicking off the actual console without a lack of innovation, or trying to push major AAA third-party games as if, like, those were so important for Nintendo fans. These are historically things that Nintendo fans just did not care about, and I think there is still a massive subset of the Nintendo fandom that still does not care about it. And that's a massive reason as to why the Switch 2 has struggled as much as it did.
So this guy is going to make the argument that the Switch 2 failed because Nintendo talked about tech stuff going into the Switch 2 release. I actually don't disagree with him. Is that, like, I don't like them talking about frame rates or resolutions and all like that. Like, nobody should care about that. But like the issue we've been seeing, when it comes to like the general Nintendo community right now is that like this is the general tactic to downplay Nintendo games is just endlessly bringing like the frame rate and the resolution into question when like talking about them. Like, well, why would I want to play Zelda if it's not like at 60 frames per second? So they had to come out and they had to be like, no, 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 it runs as well as a PS5 Pro. It runs as well as a high-end gaming PC. There's no need to worry about that. Like, it's unfortunate that they had to do it because nobody really cares, like, at all. Like, this is just something that people use to downplay the console and the games, right? But um the idea that like Nintendo failed because of a change in like business tactic or a marketing tactic rather, like that's just asinine and makes no sense, especially considering the console has been doing very well. So the entire point is moot regardless. Like, yeah, the Switch 2 is selling very, very well.
As it has. I think a lot of it comes down to how you felt during the time of the Wii U. If you were somebody that just enjoyed the Wii U, you understood that it was like failure and you didn't really care about the background noise, you probably looked back at that era of Nintendo fairly fondly, at least to an extent. Maybe not as much as the Switch, maybe not even as much as the Wii time. But, it was a Nintendo era. A fairly short Nintendo era that was probably supplemented with the 3DS that you also owned. But if you're somebody that was chronically online, or you were forever just bullied by everybody around you because you wanted the Wii U to be considered a powerhouse with like, it was a third-party machine, and it was no longer like the same waggle thing that we saw with the Wii, and you wanted to feel validated because the Wii U was like the first HD Nintendo console and Mario was in HD and all this different stuff, and you just got really sucked into the console wars either because people were making fun of you too much or because you're way too attached with your console and how other people felt about it, then yeah, I can totally see why there is still a massive subset of the Nintendo fandom from that era that might not look at the Wii U days fondly. But I will tell you this much, it's not that this is necessarily right, but if the reason you didn't like the Wii U era was because of so many people in the background just like making fun of you for being a Nintendo fan, if you think that the launch of the Switch 2 made things better, you might be in for a rude awakening in the future when you're looking back at the Switch 2 days. I don't ever recall people viewing Nintendo fans as corporate bootlickers, or major shills, or pathetic Disney adults. These are not my words, this is typically the words of the gaming community these days. Look, basically, all I'm trying to say is that the Switch 2 is worse than the Wii U. Alright, that's all I got for tonight. Good night!
This was never about being validated. This was never about being accepted by other people. Like, the simple fact of the matter is that the masses were constantly making things up about the Wii U even before it came out, and it became like a huge issue. Okay, like even today, you have people like just saying completely ridiculous things about it. For example, the insistence among most gaming YouTubers right now that Star Fox Zero was a remake of 64 when in actuality, it's nothing like that. Like, again, when you see people like brazenly lying about a video game console over and over and over again, you're going to have a problem with it. Okay. Like, the Wii U actually is what kickstarted a lot of major third party support for Nintendo consoles. Okay. They got a lot of people on board, like, immediately. Ubisoft, they had WB, you know, they had like a lot of third party support like initially, and over time they started getting more and more third parties to the point where like we're pretty much getting every third party game day and date on Switch 2. Okay, like the Wii U is what kicked off, like, I think, Nintendo's new like general third party support. It was a big deal at the time that like Wii U had third party support, and then like it was seen as like a major blow when like third parties pulled their support like in a desperate bid to destroy the console, and like event that just didn't work. Okay, like we're at the point now where like Activision has like completely failed to keep Call of Duty off of Nintendo consoles. Okay, their attempts at gaslighting people into thinking that like Nintendo owners wouldn't want this, and that like Switch wouldn't do well, and that like it just kind of imploded in their faces. Like COD is just not as big of a deal as it used to be, and we're gonna see a lot more of that going forward. Like EA has bent the knee with their sports games. Overwatch is on Switch too. Like there are very few third-party games that are still holding the line and refusing to support Nintendo consoles. It's very common. I know Falcom has been like doing very, very well on Nintendo consoles. I'm actually thinking about picking up Trails in the Sky next. Actually, it's on sale right now. So, for me personally, like, looking at like what happened with the Wii U and like why people are so defensive of it. Like this was a console that was objectively a masterpiece, okay? It was putting out like banger after banger after banger throughout its entire run. You had all these unique games for like all these different audiences. You had like all this killer like unique stuff. Like it capped off with Breath of the Wild, like the greatest game ever made. Okay. It was a phenomenal console generation, but at the time, the masses just kind of refused to acknowledge it. And considering we're now like 10 years into like the Switch's lifespan, now that we're like 10 years into like past like the point of the Wii U being discontinued. Like this is the first time in history that like we're allowed to openly like the Wii U. Okay, this is the first time in history where like people can admit that they really liked it, that they had a lot of fun with it, that like it had a lot of good games, and that's always been true, and have always been fans of it. But like 10 years ago, when this thing was still on the market, like you could not talk about this at all. And it was just so unbelievably frustrating. So, of course, a lot of Wii U fans have a big problem with how the console was treated when it first premiered. Like Nintendeen's entire like revisionist cope that like nobody made fun of Wii U owners, that like it wasn't a thing that was happening, that it was like it's all in our heads, bro, that like it's just it's just not true at all. Like it's just the simple reality of it. Like the reality of it is that the Wii U was unfairly treated by the media and by developers. It was like disrespected by gamers and by like the wider culture, and among actual Nintendo fans, people like myself who were playing every console at the time. It was by far better than like all of them. It was better than gaming PC. It was better than Steam. It was better than like Xbox, the Xbox One, which I still have barely played. Like a decade of owning mine. Again, the Wii U was like a masterpiece, and what we're seeing now is that Nintendeen is doing the same exact thing that YouTube drifters were doing 10 years ago. Like the only difference is that he's doing it with the Switch 2 instead of the Wii U. Okay, he's glazing the Wii U. He's saying it was a great console. He's saying that everyone loved it. And 10 years from now, you're going to have like Nintendeen successor saying the same thing about the Switch 2, about how things were so much better back in the day. How things were so much better with the Switch 2 and how we were getting so many other games. Like this kind of like discourse, it says more about the player base than it says about the actual console and the actual games, because inevitably what ends up happening in like 90% of these cases is that your favorite Nintendo console is going to be the one that you grew up with. It's the one you played the most. It's the one you spent the most time with. Like it doesn't necessarily mean the console is the best, but it's the one you're the most familiar with. And I think that's kind of what's happening now, is that people who like primarily played the Wii U are more and more willing to stick up for it, especially since so many of its games have been ported to Switch and become huge successes. We've seen a lot of this in recent years. New Super Mario Bros. U, in particular, has become this huge hit and this huge success, and it's like it's more popular now than it was when it first came out. And that seems ridiculous, but when you take into consideration like how disrespected that game was, and how like the entire gaming industry like rallied behind this idea that like 2D Mario was stale, played out, and boring, like you really do understand that the Wii U was a very great console, selling itself to an audience that did not want to play Nintendo games. Like the simple fact of the matter is, when the Wii U came out, that was the peak relevancy of third party games. It was the peak of relevancy for like Assassin's Creed, for COD, for like Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in 2013. Like, uh, you know, the market very specifically wanted these super hyper realistic open world games, and like we're only just now moving away from that mindset, and people are growing more of an appreciation for what Nintendo does. And I feel as if Nintendeen's take, this idea that the Wii U and the Switch 2, they can be compared in this way. It's not reasonable, because it's the same company. A lot of these Wii U games are available on Switch 2, right? All of Wii U's successes, everything good it did, it led to the Switch 2, and the Switch 2 will lead into future Nintendo hardware and software and onward, right? We're going to continue seeing the company grow and evolve, putting out great new content, great new pieces of hardware, and like great new experiences. And like the idea that Nintendo like mysteriously fell off after the Wii U is just completely laughable. And honestly, like Nintendeen's assertion that like the Wii U is better than the Switch is just, it doesn't really make any sense, because, and that's coming from someone who did say that the Wii U was better than the Switch for like the first 5 years of its life or so. Like, I didn't think the Switch hit its stride until like 2021 or so, with like Metro Dread and No More Heroes 3 and stuff like that. Like, for me, the Wii U was peak Nintendo. If it kept going, if they kept putting out more games for it, it probably would be one of my all-time favorite Nintendo consoles. And even today, I still look back on it fondly, and I really love and appreciate this thing. But we can't allow people like Nintendeen to use the Wii U's legacy, to use its enduring popularity and relevancy to like shit talk modern Nintendo consoles. Like, this is something that like it just shouldn't be allowed by the community. It's disrespectful. It's alienating people who like genuinely like the Switch 2. It just comes off as if you're desperate to push this narrative that like Nintendo's constantly on the verge of failure. And it's something that I've always been very outspoken against. It's something that I've spoken out a lot about a lot, and this is just another example of just like nostalgia blinded boomers insisting that everything was better back in their day. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Support my Patreon, and I will see you all next time.